Hello, everybody. I'm Josh Welsh, president of Film Independent, and welcome to Film Independent Presents. We are very excited today to be we've screened the film and now we're having a conversation with the director of I Am GRETA, Nathan Grossman. Nathan, thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Josh.
Before we start, just a couple of quick thank yous from Film Independent. I want to thank our lead funder, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. The HFPA makes our year-round screening program possible, so thank you to the HFPA. Also, thanks to our screening partner, Vision Media. That's the platform that we use for screening all the films. And then last, but certainly not least, thank you to the Los Angeles Times, our media partner for this program. We love all of you and are deeply grateful that we're able to continue doing programming thanks to all of your generosity. Nathan, I love this film so much. I'm really excited to talk to you and learn. I don't know much of the backstory of how the film got to be made. So, but you know, Greta Thunberg is such an incredible character for a film. And I felt like I learned so much about her and her family and her trajectory over the course of this. And honestly, just the access that you had being able to spend time with her over an extended period of time was really remarkable. So I hope if people are watching this who haven't seen the film yet, please go check it out. In the US, it's available on Hulu, but available worldwide, I believe, at this point. Nathan, could you, going back to the beginning, so the film starts with her, she's just alone sitting outside the parliament. How did you come to this story? How did it start? Was that the beginning where you just were following a kind of unknown girl, or what? How did it come about?
Yeah, like many documentaries, it started with a tip. I got a tip from a friend of mine that knew Greta's family a little bit, that she was going to do some kind of a small manifestation outside the Swedish parliament. And this was in the summer of 2018, and we'd had a very warm summer in Sweden with lots of forest fires. And I've been doing some kind of documentaries that is not directly on climate change, but kind of in relationship to it. And so I had a discussion with my boss, and I was like, maybe it's interesting to at least do some kind of a recce to see what kind of person this is, and what kind of an activism this is. Because, you know, I remember I Googled Greta Thunberg in Sweden then, and there were like just a few results. She had done like an op-ed thing with one newspaper, and I read that and was like, this is interesting. But it was still one of those, you know, kind of long shots. So I decided to go to this tiny street, which is outside the Swedish Parliament building, and there she sat by this kind of stone wall with her sign, and I had never seen her before, and in the beginning it was actually a bit hard finding her. Even I remember me and the sound engineer, we kind of looked around like, is she even doing this? And then I talked to her and said, you know, I might just be here for a day, you know, to do a recce, so don't get sad if I don't kind of stay. That's just the way filmmaking works, you know. But piece by piece, people started to talk to her, and other journalists passed by, and you know, and I kind of felt that she has something, and decided to kind of continue following it.
And was she open when you first spoke to her like that? Was she open to it? Did she talk to you about what she was doing, or you were mainly observing her talking to other people?
No, of course, I told her about me and what I was doing, and she was kind of very she of course did this because she wanted people to kind of recognize it, and we're like, as long as you don't interfere with my activism. And of course I called I think it was the father, because I got his number from her and called up and said, you know, just to get the consent, because she was a minor. But it was more, and as you can see in the film, I don't want to spoil too much for the ones who haven't seen, but it's in the beginning, I don't have much access, and it's more kind of me trying to figure a way to kind of start capturing this. And then piece by piece, when her activism kind of continued and I kind of went back and back again and got more kind of trust, the film kind of starts to get closer in a sense.
And how long was that process from that first day when you filmed her out on the street to when you realized this was going to be a feature film focused on her, where there was like, you know, it became the film that it is?
No, but it was actually a fairly long process, which I think many documentarians kind of recognize, in the sense that you you're following something and you don't have any idea in the beginning what it is even, and then you don't know where it's heading. So I think it took me until sometime in the winter of 2018 that I followed for a few months and more. And then I didn't work full time on it either, because I didn't really know if it was that interesting apart from a Nordic perspective. But then suddenly strikes in Australia and Belgium started to pop up, and there were not just 500 kids like it was in the Nordics on these marches, but it was tens of thousands of kids, and many of them had signs saying, "I stand with you, Greta." And then in that moment, I think it really struck me that her way of kind of talking about this issue, that compressing it down to something that was so emotional and easy to understand, it made an impact on people far from Sweden, and I decided to really kind of step it up a notch and start following her more and travel on and so on.
It's remarkable. So when you first were filming her, how old was she then? 15 when she was out on the street?
Yeah, I think it was 15.
Wow. So then I mean, there's so much that's remarkable in this film. I mean, all the footage of her travels and her, you know, every scene of her speaking is remarkable. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was also her relationship with her father, and the sort of including that in the film. There's this beautiful access that you get to her and her father, seeing them together and seeing that relationship just kind of, parent-child dynamic. And but also at the same time, there's this extraordinary thing happening where she's suddenly, her voice is magnified. And can you talk about how you approached that with her father? And was that pretty straightforward, getting that access, or how did you navigate sort of filming these intimate, personal family scenes with the bigger story?
No, but I think it was some time when I started to decide to kind of go more deep in it, and I asked Greta if I could join on one of the first trips that she was taking. And then the father, he's what we in Sweden call a hemmapappa, which is like a at-home father. I don't know if you have it in the States, but it's the
Yeah.
equivalent of an at-home mom, but it's a dad.
Uh-huh.
And he was, driving the car and helping her. And I remember I sat in the back seat of the car, and that was my first like interaction with him, where I kind of more spent time with him, just seeing him pass before. And I had to kind of bite my lip because I was almost laughing, because this kind of teenage relationship was instantly popping up, just as when you were young and you traveled with a family friend and you were in the car with them, and suddenly you understood, okay, so this is the dynamic. And I was like,
Yeah.
instantly felt that this is something I want to include in the film. This is such an important kind of part of the story, and it's also like the movie I wanted to be from her point of view, because I thought it was so much noise of analysis and ideas around her, and not kind of no one really trying to get inside her head. But I felt that the father, in kind of more verite scenes, was such a funny and interesting and an emotional person to kind of bounce her feelings towards. So that became and is a large part of the plot, that relationship.
And as you were filming that, I mean, I love how as you said, you're telling it from her point of view. So the father is there and he clearly has his view on things. And he's like talking to her about like editing the speech or how she needs to eat food. Like those scenes really pop out. But it's like what comes through in that is her strength of character, or her stubbornness, or her determination to do things her way. Like she hears him, she responds, but there's just this, the focus remains on her. Like she's the one making the decisions in that, which I thought was really remarkable to see. I'm assuming, was that kind of just how it was throughout, where, she's sort of leading the charge, and is her
Yeah,
family
but
kind of following her in that?
I think I think uh, I think it's interesting in the sense that she's very, I think many teenagers are stubborn. I think maybe that was one of the things that I laughed about in that backseat of the car, in the sense
Yeah.
that I think anyone who has been a teenager or have had teenage children know that weird thing where teenagers, they don't want you to be there, and you're just an annoying parent. But at the same time, in that age, you still kind of have fun with your parents, and you still need lots of help from them with
Yeah.
logistics. And I think that kind of power balance is something which is very interesting, and which is portrayed, but to the difference that Greta, I think, is a bit more stubborn than the average kind of teenager, which of course I've noted filming her, and also why I decided this kind of more verite style, because I didn't want to interfere with her activism and asking her to do stuff, because that was just impossible. Instead, I felt like, okay, but I more try to capture what goes on in this kind of way instead.
So I imagine it would be very exciting and also challenging for you as a filmmaker because as you're making the film, the story is blowing up. Like her reach and her voice is just becoming bigger and bigger and more impactful. And it's amazing the scenes you get of her meeting with Macron or the EU or the UN. Like she just goes from like, I mean, you have a meeting with the Pope, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like everyone wants to talk to her, and you're there filming throughout that entire process. Can you talk, what sort of crew did you have? Was it, I'm imagining it was very small. I don't know if it was just you or if there were other people, but how did you, especially on the travel segments, how did you approach that from the production perspective?
No, but it's, in that sense, it's so nice to talk to you guys, which know the kind of hassles, but also the positives of independent filmmaking in a sense. Because in this film, I've been very lonely, in the sense that we didn't have any funding in the beginning, anything except from a small sum from the Swedish public broadcaster, like the equivalent of the BBC here in Sweden. And so I decided to shoot this myself as a DOP. I have a background in as a cinematographer, and also quickly understood that this is also the way to kind of get into these rooms, as you expressed. Like things were happening very quickly, and on this kind of very high political level, sometimes having a big crew actually makes it harder to get in. It's even now ridiculously hard just to be able to kind of sneak into those rooms. And I figure that if I kind of present myself as this kind of just one person and an independent filmmaker, it might be easier than if I run in with two DOPs, two sound engineers. And that really kind of struck gold, in the sense that I was able to get into many places where other journalists and filmmakers couldn't get, because they didn't have time to kind of on getting the access, and also that they didn't have the right kind of quickness in their setup.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the key elements of Greta Thunberg's story, and that comes out in the film, is discussed quite a bit, is the fact that she has Aspergers and OCD and selective mutism. You know, she talks about those things. When you first met her, I'm assuming that you were not aware of those things, so that would have been something you learned about her in the process. Was that, well, I'm not sure what my question is about that, except just how you, as a filmmaker, like that's a big element to introduce into a story about climate activism. And were she and her father pretty open about that up front, or was that something that you had to navigate?
No, very much open. I think in the sense that I remember that she had this, I think it was a Twitter account already from starting her activism. And on that account, there was, 15-year-old climate activist with Asperger's syndrome or something. So she was very open with the diagnosis. And I asked her a lot about it in the beginning, and noted how she kind of always came back to talking about it, because she's one of these people, and I maybe it's something Swedish, I don't know, in a sense that I don't think we in Sweden see Asperger's necessarily as a disease, as some people see it. Of course, it comes with some positives and it comes with some negatives, as everything in life. But here we don't have that kind of view of it. And I think she has really kind of encompassed that in her way of speaking about it, and is so open. So it was more kind of hard not to include it, as it's something that she kind of goes back to over and over again. It's something she wants to kind of explain. So instead, that became a part of why I also kind of took this direction of kind of inside her kind of inner monologue, and lowering the camera down to her kind of perspective, because instead of just kind of saying those lines, kind of OCD and Aspergers, it's more of, what can I do as a filmmaker? Okay, I can try to understand what that means, and I can bring the camera down to kind of that position. And I think that's where kind of cinematic storytelling, at least from my point of view, can make a difference in comparison to many other kind of literature and radio, and we have the ability in film to get inside people's kind of world, and with Asperger, your world is looking a little bit differently. And I think for Greta, it's a very big part of why she became this activist. And I think in the movie, I at least tried to show that.
I mean, one of the striking things about the film to me, and one of the most powerful visual elements, is just the amount of time that you spend on her and her face. And she has a very, I mean, through all these different situations, you're always right there capturing her as people around her are talking, whether they're insulting her or saying these fawning, overpraising her, like whatever angle it's coming from, you're on her face, and there's this steady, calm, I mean, she is expressive, but there's a certain, she's just taking it all in, and you're taking her in. I mean, I feel like you really get a sense in this film of what it's like to be her, because you're seeing her reacting to everything swirling around her. And there's this, and the more the film goes on, I feel like it just builds this. To me, what I took away from it was this sense of her strength, and like, she is not going to be shaken. In a way, there's even a certain repetition to it. Like, she goes to all these different events, and she makes her speech, she says what she's going to say, and there's variation there, of course, but she's saying the same damn thing, and people just are not listening, or they're pretending to listen, right? I mean, it's the adults know what's going on, but they take no action. And
No, but
it's just calmly just pointing it out over and over and over.
Yeah, it's a very kind of special, in a sense. I remember talking to my super talented kind of editing crew, and we were talking about, okay, but building dramaturgy, sometimes you don't want to repeat things, but in this dramaturgy we have to, at least for one extent of the film, because that's kind of what's so interesting with climate change, that the issue right now, when we're kind of in this phase of, I don't know, climate change 2.0, where we've at least understood what it is, but we're not acting, is that the issue is that we're repeating this in news articles by activists, even politicians, but nothing is really happening. So we have to kind of put that into the kind of dramaturgy of the movie. And also it makes me very happy to hear you kind of speak about that choice, because of course we discussed a lot, how can we make a film that or I can kind of, how can I interpret her world? And I felt very quickly that I don't want to do this extravaganza with flying drones and shooting her on a dolly when she goes to the school or whatever. I just felt like her world is fairly simple and straightforward, and everything is kind of, and she's so focused on this thing, she sometimes doesn't hear adults, and we've even sometimes when I shoot, it's shot from a low angle and we don't see adults. They're almost like these kind of extras, in a sense, just kind of walking outside of frame. And it's kind of, it's not a fancy way of shooting, but it's I think it's as close to how she sees the world as I could interpret it, as at least.
I wanted to ask about one specific sequence in the film, which is the boat trip across the Atlantic to go to the UN. I'm assuming you were clearly on the boat. How long was that trip, and what was that experience like?
I think it was a little bit more than two weeks, like 15 days ish, the sailing trip. And of course, I don't want to spoil too much of the film again, but it was kind of, I think, many moments during this kind of spectacular and emotional year has been, when you have to pinch yourself in the arm, because it's like, oh, what is this? Like, things are going so quickly. But I would never have guessed that I would sail over the Atlantic in a carbon fiber kind of racing boat on this story. And I remember when Greta said that she had posted on her social media accounts that she was looking for someone to take, like, to take a ride over the Atlantic in a sailing boat. But I didn't understand then that the guy who said yes to this had this, you know, was a racing sailor and did this kind of super harsh thing. So it came to a shock to me when I spoke to him about this, and I was a bit reluctant actually in the beginning to kind of join in myself, because I don't have that experience of kind of extreme sports filmmaking and so on. But I spoke to the captain, and he said it was going to be bumpy, but not necessarily dangerous. And then I said, you know, okay, but I filmed this movie with this kind of objective and this idea that I wanted to tell, and this will definitely be a part of understanding what struggle this is for her. So I went on the boat, and what can you say, washing machine maybe I don't know what kind of a that's what's so nice by being a filmmaker, in a sense, that you don't have to explain it kind of in words, because it's so many liters of shake, water, spray, and sound. So
it really looked, as you described, it looked safe, but very challenging. Like, you got a sense of the speed that you guys were going across that water. It was amazing. And
yeah,
also it just looked like such a spare vessel that you must have felt every time it hit the waves, it must have gone through your
I
body.
think that's something. It's also so interesting because I'm so happy that the film, that it kind of took some time to kind of make it, in a sense that people, I think people, even when these kind of activities happened and when it was a lot in the media, everything was covered so kind of swiftly, and that's how the media works. It's you know, framing things easily, and I don't think people understood that this, you know, what this racing boat was, you know, that it didn't look like this, like a V shape, like these yachts that you see in marinas. It was like flat, like a surfboard. There's nothing in there, you know. When you go in, you don't go down. There's nothing. It's just like flat, because you don't want it to move over the water as quick as possible. So it was really, she really decided to do something very adventurous. And as you can see in the film, of course, that was tough. But I also must admit that she actually later on in the trip was probably the one who kind of took it best. And me, which is, you know, I'm a grown-up, and one of the captains, we were actually the ones that, you know, lapping ourselves with these kind of patches with some kind of a nausea thing. So it's interesting. You never know kind of who takes these challenges kind of best. It's really going out to the unknown, doing this.
What kind of camera did you shoot the entire film on? And on the boat, were you using the same rig, or did you have to kind of waterproof things?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you guys this is the first time, so this is you're getting exclusive tip here, which is so interesting, because before we were going to shoot on the boat, I talked to my producers and I was like, I don't know how to do this, and I have found this guy, and he's like super expensive, but he's going to give me like a tech list. And they were like, is it really worth paying lots of money for just a list and like one call? I was like, yeah, he's a specialist. He just films on these weird boats. And I decided to push through that and got that budget post. And every single thing that was said on that kind of list, with small kind of bolts and batteries, and that we had three, you know, we had three cameras, spare cameras. I think it was Sony A7S, like the film, the DSLRs, but we had so many extras because he had this weird kind of thing which like everything will break, and it did, you know. Wow. In the end, when we were sailing into the US, I think I only had one left, you know. Wow. Because one, the audio didn't work, and the other one needed a repair in the kind of in some way. So it was, you know, it was really it was like the preparation for that trip was so important. It looks kind of simple, but every shot in there was kind of, we really tried to prepare.
Yeah. Wow. So the film, Another thing I want to say about the film that struck me, just in terms of the story and the content and kind of what the viewer is experiencing, is like, on the one hand, it's this inspiring story of this fierce activist who's a remarkable person. On the other hand, there's something very depressing right throughout. There's no false optimism from her. She is like repeatedly saying things are bad and we're reaching a point where we can't turn it around. And people are hypocrites. People say they're going to do it and they don't. And there's just this, it never changes. And when people praise her and say, oh, it's all about you, she's like, no, it's not about me. Like, she's so grounded and not focused on herself. And it's just unrelenting, like this sense of we're racing towards, annihilation here. And she's pointing it out, and nobody is, all these people, whether it's the Pope or Macron or whomever, all these people wanting selfies with her. It just, so many of the adults seem, on the one hand, they appreciate her, but on the other hand, they're totally missing it. They're so frivolous, or they're just caught up in like this kind of excitement without actually doing what she's saying needs to be done. So I don't know, I found it both inspiring and also enraging and depressing, right? What's happening there.
No, but that's really interesting, Josh. And that's a very interesting kind of balance. I think, once again, it's a little bit of a Scandinavian kind of trait in a sense. I think when you speak to more international kind of ways, it's like, is it inspirational or is it investigative? And I think here in Sweden, we at least we have a tonality sometimes where it could be, but it's truthful in the sense that it is both inspirational, and it also carries this very heavy load of kind of, and that thus it becomes very bittersweet, in the sense that, the sweetness comes from the strength of this activism and the strength of kind of seeing how Greta is really doing what she wants to do, and how she's really using kind of the talent that she has, and that gives her something. But of course, it's better in the sense that you see instantly how she's running into this brick wall of kind of a political establishment, and also worse than that, a wall of an adult world who to some extent really don't want to talk about this, because it's putting them into a kind of bad situation. There is this generational divide, I think, which is kind of part of that conflict that makes it a bit hard to watch, I think, for some, because you understand quickly that, okay, these young people, they will kind of live their lives in this future. Like when we're talking 2050, 2060, those are not just numbers for them. Those are important quality life years when they are going to get their kids and live their lives. And then if you're a 50, 60 or 70-year-old man, mostly the ones who will get provocated by her, of course you won't live in that future, and you want to have as much fun as you can your last kind of 10, 15 years. And one of those things is buying a new, I don't know, Mustang or whatever.
Right.
So it becomes that conflict, and I think that's a large kind of extent why people have been attacking her. They attack her as a person because they don't want to speak about those facts and figures that she's presenting. Because if they would speak about that and research about those, then much of their kind of ideas of how they want to live their life would kind of be hard.
Yeah. We've got some questions here from the audience I want to turn to. The first one from Arthur. Arthur writes, fabulous film. You had amazing access, beautiful, intimate moments. What's the possibility of doing a feature film about her? I'm assuming he means fiction. I'm a fellow filmmaker and would love to help. So is there talk of a narrative feature, or?
I don't know, actually. I followed, of course, for a year, and we have contact in the sense that, not in the same way as when we were filming, but, we text sometimes if there's something. So I don't know, but why not? Of course, sooner or later, I bet someone will kind of tell this story in the narrative space as well. But what I think might be interesting now, in a sense, is that I think my film is not like a biopic. I think it's more of like a prequel. It was actually a journalist who came up with that kind of expression. So maybe we haven't really had this kind of script yet for how Greta is going to evolve. So maybe it's a little bit early, I think, to see where this activism is heading, in a sense.
Another question comes from someone who asks, was Greta's age a factor in what access you had at all? And was there anything that her father did not want included?
Yeah, of course. I think when it comes to anyone you're following, at least from my perspective, if it's someone, a homeless person or an activist, or even someone within the political establishment, you need to have an ethical discussion about what you're doing. And I was very frank towards Greta and her father, that I need to do my point of view of this story, and you cannot influence that. Even though, she's a minor, I need to do my point of view if it could be even, possible to make a film. But what I can say to you, Greta, is that in the end of the film, you can come in the editing process and you can look at what I have kind of perceived as this story in you. And if there's anything then that you don't think is kind of, that you don't recognize yourself in, we can have a discussion about that. So I brought her in the end there. And of course, the father was also with her, and they watched the movie, and the only thing she said was actually that she recognized herself, and she was, positive that this was showing her in a much more nuanced way than this very simplified, stoic and screaming angry girl. And what she didn't want to do was remove, but she wanted to add. So she was like, can we add more context to that? Can we add more here? She wanted to make it longer. And we added some context to one scene, but of course I explained to her, that, yeah, that's the problem of movie making, that we only have a particular space, we can't do it made much longer than that.
Yeah. Another question, were you able to enjoy the film with an audience?
Yes, luckily we were actually finishing this film in a part of the kind of COVID pandemic, which was a bit kind of slower. So it's been hitting cinemas in large parts of Europe, and it's been we were premiering at Venice Film Festival, which was amazing that we got into there, which is like the only festival that was actually open this year. So it screened for a fairly large audience in the biggest cinema they had on the premiering day, and it was so special to be able to sit in a cinema like that and see it together with an audience. And I'm so happy that we were, of course it was just lucky that that was the dip in time, so we were able to do that. So of course that was something which was great for me.
That's wonderful. This is sort of a big question, but I'm curious. Obviously, when a filmmaker makes a film and releases it into the world, you hope for you hope for an audience, for people to see it. But I'm just curious with this film in particular, given that it's about an activist and you're telling it from her point of view, what are your hopes for this film? Like, what do you want this film to do?
No, but I think as a filmmaker, I think it's very, very important when we kind of speak about public figures, that we start to understand that they are not one-dimensional. Like they are so much more than what we kind of understand. And I think to a large part, I wanted people to kind of really understand the full kind of three-dimensionality of Greta, that she's this, she is this angry girl, but she's also a teenager, and she has this diagnosis, but this is more how the diagnosis feels. So I think this is not a story in that sense about climate change. It's of course a story about her. And why I wanted to tell that was because I felt that was kind of the missing piece that I felt in the narrative of her and about climate change at this moment, that we were so much talking heads and analysis around her on one part, and then it was so much figures and numbers when it came to climate change. And I was like, somewhere in the between there, this emotional story of her, where she kind of, how she feels about this issue as a young person. So I think many people will understand her and the young kind of point of view on this issue better, and thus, as we spoke about this generational divide, maybe can actually if it's that wide now, maybe if you watch the movie, it can get a little bit tighter, as young people can say to their parents when they watch it together, like, oh, but this is how she feels because she's worried about that. And then, it opens up for discussion in families that I know has been very, at least here in Sweden, it's been a big thing, and lots of people have watched it kind of within the family, and it sparked lots of those discussions.
It's interesting, as you were saying that, I flashed back to the beginning of the film where she has that encounter on the street outside the parliament with the older woman who's like, you
Yeah.
really be in school and that's how you can change the world. And I love that exchange. Like, you could tell the woman was not happy with Greta, but they were talking to each other, and it was like a conversation from these very different generations. It was a beautiful moment.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, and it kind of starts with that scene, which kind of sets the kind of agenda for a little bit, kind of the young versus the old in a sense. And then in the end, I think there's an American activist in this kind of more montage when we kind of open up the world, who says, like, where are parents, where are grandparents? And I think it's not in any way the main kind of thread of the dramaturgy, but it's definitely a very important sub story that I think I've at least seen many people and families that I've seen, and that's what kind of goes back into their discussions, kind of, and many parents and grandparents who become kind of maybe at first they feel a little bit bad for kind of not having been able to take the responsibility, but it also opens up for, I think, people kind of because I narrowing that gap in a sense, because having that conflict is not going to be beneficial for anyone.
In closing, I wanted to mention something. This is a little bit off topic, but recently I did another Q&A with two filmmakers from Ireland, the co-directors of a great animated feature that's about to come out called Wolfwalkers. They're the filmmakers who did Secret of Kell and or Book of Kell and the Song of the beautiful Irish animation. And their new film, Wolfwalkers, which is coming out later this month on Apple Plus, is it's about a young girl in Ireland during the time, I think it's 17th century, when the British have come over and they're like killing all the wolves and burning down forests. And there's a big scene of a forest being annihilated as part of getting rid of the wolves. And this girl, it's kind of a somewhat supernatural story. She becomes friends with another girl who might be able to turn into a wolf and communes with the wolves. So it's this relationship between two young girls in the woods of Ireland. And as I was watching your film, you have that scene, and I don't know if it's in Sweden or what country it's in, but where Greta is brought with some other people, and they're looking at this expanse where the forest used to be. And you can see way off the trees in the distance, and there's a shot of Greta like walking up to the tree line. And I mentioned that to the filmmakers of this Irish film. I said, I just saw this great documentary, Greta Thunberg, and they said she was an inspiration to them in making Wolfwalkers. They were thinking of her specifically, of like this fierce young girl who's, facing environmental degradation and standing up to it, in very different films, totally different. But if you get to see Wolfwalker, it's I think you might recognize Greta.
So interesting. In a sense, I understand. I think it's like it shares, of course, like connections to many other kind of stories, in a sense of David and versus Goliath, and that kind of a narrative which is someone who's small that goes up against something which is actually impossible to fight, you think, and so on. So it seems interesting. I would love to watch it.
It's a couple more questions here. I'm going to jump to the end. There's one here. I am a middle school student, and I was wondering what things people of my age can do to help fight against climate change.
Hi, so nice to hear that you're watching this Q&A as well. No, but there's lots of things that you can do, and I think the first thing that you can do is, of course, to talk to your parents and your friends about this, and to hear what they think, and read up on some kind of climate science and start discussing that with them. There's lots of great websites on the internet that kind of is connected to the United Nations, which is a very kind of stable and truthful source that kind of encompasses kind of the more kind of true scientific view of what's happening. So that's really good to look out for. So I think that's the good starting point. And then there's of course things that you can do privately. As a private person, you can, try to eat less meat, or you can try to avoid flying and so on, going by train if it's possible. So those are kind of small things that you can do as a private citizen. But we should also remember that we as kind of private persons, we can do one thing, but there's also kind of what we call systemic things, which is more kind of on a society basis. And there you maybe not have the right to vote, for instance, but then you can strike, for instance, from school. You can find your local school strike movement, and that could be one way of turning your voice up as you're a minor and cannot vote. So there's lots of things you can do, but read up on it and do something. That's always the best thing, to do something.
Great question and answer. Another question from Gail Gilbert asks, could you please talk about working with your story editor, and when did you begin that in the process?
Great question. I love hearing people mentioning those fantastic people. We need them as documentary filmmakers. And in this process, it was more kind of a step-by-step thing, as we kind of went into an early editing and compiled like rough cut, which was very long. And then one story editor came in and we worked together, and she was really good, and she actually jumped into the editing bay. And then as she touches, that's something which is really good to know for all filmmakers out there. As soon as your story editor becomes your editor, find another story editor, because as you touch the kind of keyboard and start editing, you lose that perspective. So then we found another story editor whose name is Per, who's Danish, very, he's one of the top editors of documentaries globally, and he loved the story and loved the material. And then Denmark and Sweden, we speak the same language, so we worked together in the last kind of 3 months, I think, 2.5 months of editing, and he was like there on a weekly basis, looking at rough cuts and everything.
Great. And then one more question. Could you, actually, this is also from Gail. Could you please speak about Greta's mother and the fact that she was only present in the home movies and then the emotional scene near the end?
Yeah, it's, of course, the movie is kind of a verite thing which kind of just follows her. And as this year progressed, it turned into a road movie. So actually, where I had most access, but also what was kind of making sense in kind of the storytelling, was this kind of constant on the road. And as I don't remember if I said it in this Q&A or something else, but as the father is what we call a hemma papa, which is like at home dad, he was the one going with her and became kind of the family member to bounce it with. And then when we were back in Sweden in some scenes, we could kind of bring her in, but that was very little of kind of the story.
Well, Nathan, I want to thank you so much for coming and doing this Q&A today. It's been great talking with you, and I'm a huge admirer of the film. And at Film Independent, we will do what we can to help spread the word and really share your work with an audience here.